This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. This weekend, the Trump administration's hosting right-wing leaders from across Latin America and Florida for the, quote, Shield of the Americas Summit, to launch a new security initiative for the Western Hemisphere. The heads of state from Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Panama, Paraguay, Trinidad and Tobago, and possibly others are confirmed to attend. The White House has said the initiative will be to reinforce the so-called Donroe Doctrine, signaling a level of U.S. intervention in Latin America not seen since the Cold War. Speaking on Thursday at the America's Counter-Cartel Conference at U.S. Southern Command, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth urged Latin American countries to take a more aggressive approach against drug cartels, threatening the Trump administration will otherwise be forced to act.
And today, some 200 years later, we still marvel at the wisdom of President Monroe's declaration. We, like you, want borders and sovereign territories that are secure. We want unfettered access to key terrain and trade so that our nations can industrialize. And we want to prevent external powers from threatening our peace and independence in our shared neighborhood. This is the essence of the Monroe Doctrine. No external power will interfere in this hemisphere. Ours should be a region of strong, sovereign nations. It's the same principle that animates President Trump's defense approach today. President Trump and his Department of War are ushering in a new era of homeland and hemispheric defense.
This comes as U.S. Special Forces are now in Ecuador to conduct joint military operations with Ecuadorian commandos to reportedly target suspected drug traffickers. And, as President Trump has suggested, regime change in Cuba might be his next target after attacking Iran and Venezuela. For more, we're joined by Jake Johnston, Director of International Research at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, author of the book Aid State, Elite Panic, Disaster Capitalism, and the Battle to Control Haiti. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Can you explain what this meeting is about and talk about Cuba now in the crosshairs?
Yeah, of course, and thanks for having me. I mean, I think, you know, on its surface, the summit is a show, right? An opportunity for Trump to play out a moment of imperial fantasy in front of fans in South Florida. But I think taking a step back, you know, this does fit very much in line with what has been really in many ways a bipartisan and decades-long strategy of undermining and breaking the left governments in Latin America and consolidating a pro-U.S. right-wing, bloc throughout the hemisphere. And so you see the countries that have sort of appropriately shown their fidelity to the Trump administration and to U.S. policy get invited, and those that don't face the wrath of the Trump administration. We've seen that in Venezuela, in Colombia, in Mexico, and elsewhere, and obviously, as you mentioned, in Cuba.
And Jake, for more than 80 years, the main sort of international body that the United States supported in Latin America was the OAS, the Organization of American States. What does this attempt to create a right-wing, basically pole in Latin America say about U.S. policy toward the region?
Yeah, it's a really great point, right? I mean, for decades we've been saying, oh, the OAS is largely controlled by the U.S. It's run by the U.S. The U.S. is, funding more than half of its budget, and that's true. It has largely advanced U.S. interest, and for this administration, even that's not enough because it is a forum that everyone is invited to, and there are actual rules, and it's an institution. That obviously doesn't suit this administration's desires, right? Which is to really erode those institutions, erode any concepts of sovereignty and international law. And we can see, how this is not just about this hemisphere, right? I mean, you mentioned the Donroe Doctrine, this Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, right? And this is often interpreted as sort of a retrenchment from the rest of the world. I mean, one, we've seen Trump bomb all over the world indiscriminately, and so I don't think that was ever true. But also, looking at historical parallels here, when the United States has sort of focused internally on the Western Hemisphere, that is largely about consolidating control here to then export that globally and extend that globally. And you played in the intro, right? Trump sort of referencing his intervention in Venezuela now with Iran. You can see him doing this. Now, of course, they haven't actually consolidated control in Latin America, but you can see that sort of logic, using the hemisphere as sort of a place, as Greg Grandin, a frequent guest on your show, has called it the Empire's Workshop. So we see how this, the targeting of Cuba, the targeting of Venezuela, the indiscriminate bombing and extrajudicial killings with the drug boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and all of these things. This is not just about the hemisphere. This is about U.S. power more globally.
And also, could you comment about the countries that are absent from this? Well, clearly, countries like Nicaragua and Cuba, and to some degree even Venezuela, would be excluded by the U.S. But the three largest countries in population in Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia, are also not a part of this effort. How do you feel their governments are dealing, specifically Mexico, with this increased pressure from the Trump administration to lock down and control all of Latin America?
Yeah, I think this is really important, obviously, and we've seen pushback from Colombia, from Brazil, from Mexico, and I think it is worth noting this represents about half of the population in the hemisphere. So we can present this divided region or all of these right-wing governments, but there is still this significant bloc. But of course, they're under extreme pressure, right? What this administration has shown with the bombing of Caracas, the abduction of Maduro, these extrajudicial killings, right, is that they will go to extreme lengths to punish you if you do not get in line. Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil have all faced that, right? Have all tried to face that and are trying to survive. So I think we do have to understand that. And alone, they are weaker, right? This requires a broader regional and institutional response to check this administration's sort of total erosion of international law. And what we've seen, I think, this effort to gather the right wing is intended to prevent that, right? Is intended to prevent any meaningful opposition to U.S. policy, both in the hemisphere and writ large. And we've seen that, right? So after the abduction of Maduro, CELAC, which is a regional grouping involving all of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, but excluding the United States, met to try and come up with a statement. And actually, a majority of countries did agree to a statement, but a small bloc, 9 countries, intervened to stop that statement from coming out. There was no official statement. Now, those 9 countries are now, almost all of them, invited to Miami to this summit, right? And you can see in the run-up to this, the news of the summit came out about 3 weeks ago, and you've seen this sort of rash of decisions from leaders in the region to sort of show their fidelity to the U.S., so ending cooperation with Cuba, and all sorts of other diplomatic decisions. We saw Honduras and Bolivia actually withdraw from the Hague Group, which was a diplomatic and institutional initiative to try and use international law to end the genocide in Gaza, in which a number of countries in Latin America have been a part of, including Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico, and Honduras and Bolivia under left-wing governments had also been a part of that. They both recently withdrew just in this last week as the Hague Group is meeting with 40 countries to try and come up with an institutional response to this. And so you can see, again, how this is about using the hemisphere. And I think sort of ironically, right, much of international law and these concepts of sovereignty really came out of Latin American thinking, and the administration now sort of using that same region to undermine them globally.
And finally, Jake, U.S. commandos joining U.S. Special Forces in Ecuador, joining Ecuadorian commandos in this last 20 seconds?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, this is a hyper-militarized and overtly politicized remix of the war on drugs and the war on terror, right? Ecuador has been begging for the U.S. to get involved in that and since Noboa took power. But this is not about drugs. This is not about terror. I mean, the U.S. pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, the convicted drug trafficking former president of Honduras, and Noboa in Ecuador, his own family has been accused of involvement in the drug trade. And so, look, this is about politics. This is about power. This is not about drugs, and this is not about democracy or anything else.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.